Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to this week's edition of Faith to Faith. During this new series of programs, we'll be exploring the contemporary world of interfaith relations and its relevance in the 21st century. And we ask the big questions. Is peaceful coexistence really achievable when all faiths claim to have the truth? Why are sectarian conflicts between people of the same faiths so acrimonious? And is there an increasing secular militancy against faith-based lifestyles? We will look at the rise of so-called fundamentalist approaches to faith and investigate their impact on current perceptions of religion. We will also scrutinize the role of faith institutions, the media, the state, and corporations in shaping civil society's notion of what religion is. In a world which is both increasingly competitive and materialistic, and where resources are diminishing rapidly with rising economic uncertainty and no sign of reduction in poverty, how is faith taking on the challenge of dealing with the root causes of these problems? What are faith institutions doing about, say for instance, the continued exploitation and destruction of the environment? How are we dealing with infanticide, human rights violations, and the sale of arms, still one of the largest industries on the planet? It's not hard to conclude that we have a potential for increase in violence, war, conflict and terror. Is there a role for interfaith activism on the world stage?
All the instincts that are given into all humanity, they all represent faith to me. Actually, if I just go out and look around closely, everything represents faith to me and gives me a feeling of a higher power that is controlling this all as a system.
We entered this museum. It's called Cartwright Hall Gallery. Over here we can see works of people from diverse cultures, diverse backgrounds. So it's how people belonging to different cultures, different backgrounds and their imaginations. If we look at their beliefs of love or like spiritual love, then you could see writings from Quran, then you could see Roman gods, then you can see Hindu gods, so which represents their diverse faith. But I think everybody preaches the same thing, the same values.
Today we are in the National Media Museum learning how to make animation movies. But what I can't figure out actually is the relationship between faith and animation. For me, faith is something very personal. And I think animation is going to give you a way to express what you think faith is.
The theme of the animation is based on religion and what religion means to you, and it meant lots of different things to people.
Faith to me means light, to be enlightened.
Your faith is come from the inside of your heart.
Just trusting and believing what you may not necessarily see.
I believe that you can have faith, but not just like religiously, but in something or in someone.
I hope that they learn the basic concept of animation, just how long it actually takes to do animation, and understand what it means to all of them, or what religion means to each and every one of them.
Some of us want to be up on clouds, some of us want to be in heaven and on cliffs and stuff like that. And we're going to put those stories into animations and see how it turns out. What does faith mean to me?
Yeah.
Faith means to me something that is hope. It gives me hope and there's nothing else. You know, it gives me hope without material.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to this week's edition of Faith to Faith, the Occupy Faith Pilgrimage for Justice. With me in the studio, I have Jonathan Dinwoody. Jonathan, welcome. And we have Catherine Harrison. Hello. Catherine, welcome. Alan Bulwell. And we have Nina Cardoso.
Hi.
Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
These are my pilgrims. We're going to listen to their story. It's a fascinating story of personal, a very personal journey, spiritual in some ways and socially active in many ways. But a lot of other things seem to have emerged during this journey. Last week we saw our pilgrims set off on the road to Canterbury. Along the way they encountered hospitality from members of the public. And were given shelter in a church. A Sikh temple was the next stage of their journey. And onwards they walked to discover what marks are left by men. This week's programme sees the conclusion of their pilgrimage. You arrive at this wonderful church, and you were travelling along the A. Was it the A20?
A2.
John? Oh, the A2, John.
It's the main road from. It's actually the old ancient pilgrim route, as we discovered when we were on the path. It's the ancient
it's Watling
pilgrim
Street,
route.
isn't it?
Watling.
Roman road.
Is it Watling?
Is it
Yes.
It's one of the Roman roads.
It's one of the Roman roads, and it goes. Well, it's a direct line actually from the steps of St Paul's straight to the Canterbury Cathedral. But this particular clip that you're talking about, that's a very special. But one of the things about the pilgrimage, let's just step back a second, was some very, very wonderful people that we met on the way, and Canon Allen, as we got to know him. He was sort of known as Father Christmas, actually, but due to his long white beard. But he was a man, a very quiet, self-effacing, humble person. But when you actually got into conversation with him, he was a profound thinker, really profound, and had some very gentle but interesting suggestions to make to some of the members of the pilgrimage. And what was very powerful for me personally, as a sort of, I'd been drawn into the pilgrimage as well by this time, even as a filmmaker, was that here we were in Canon Allen's church, and he was sort of guiding us through a sort of history of the path that the pilgrims had made for so many generations before us. And I think it was around this point in the pilgrimage that we began to really feel the resonance of history and the spiritual sort of echo of the generations on our own journey. It was quite a sobering moment for me, actually, and quite heartening too at the same time.
That was one fascinating aspect of it, that you, the whole history that you were treading, if you like, that, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, which actually this whole last leg almost mirrors in a way, is also, it's part of English literature, it's part of English heritage, it's part of English culture. But these pilgrims actually did this. So when Chaucer wrote his Canterbury Tales, he was actually really documenting perhaps a fiction that he conceived, but it was a very done thing. It's not done so much now. I mean, I don't think the power of pilgrimage in certainly Britain manifests itself certainly on that scale. It is still done across the world, and Mecca and places like that attract millions and millions, perhaps are the largest congregations, single congregations of mass, the masses anywhere in the world. So it is still very much a powerful thing within human civilization to go on these pilgrimages. Why do you think in the West, why do you think in Britain it's not really in vogue, perhaps?
I think it's a sad mirror of the consumer culture that we live in, that certainly in cities, communities have to some extent fallen into decay, and I think communities have fragmented, and I think people, as groups, have kind of lost their way in the internet and the Facebook generation, and people spend quite a lot of their time communicating long distance, rather than within close proximity, where they can actually touch converse with each other, which I think is a terrible shame. I think that's one of the reasons why pilgrimage and spirituality actually in general in the West here, well, I can only really speak for England, which is the culture I know, but I've watched the church decline even over my lifetime, you know, as the secularisation of our society has continued apace. And I personally feel that in a way we've slightly lost touch with, you know, the falcon can't hear the falconer here much anymore. We've got into a situation where the basic principles of human decency and those principles, for me, overlap with quite a lot of the basic principles of quite a few different faiths. But I think a lot of people have been tempted away from connection with those principles, and I think that's one of the reasons why people don't go on pilgrimages anymore.
Well, that's a fascinating answer. Consumerism and spirituality. I mean, you were presumably not very, very linked into the spiritual sphere in a formal sense, Alan, but you're a strong battler against the concepts of consumerism. How did this experience at this point relate to all your political and social views and attitudes? Were you affected by this time?
Well, in relation to the clip, I think it was becoming part of history. I mean, you go into the church, you see those crosses scribed into the wall where old pilgrims would have sat there all night carving this cross and meditating, praying. And that is what we now conceive of as history. And these churches are usually held in some sort of sacred time vacuum, where you go in there, you want to be very respectful, you don't want to change or move a thing, but by being invited by the canon to carve that cross, it was being part of history, but also changing something. And that's got very spiritual, symbolic connotations towards both the spiritual change and the perhaps political change we were trying to make. Yeah, that's going to be something that's there now, and somebody might look at in the future and say, "Oh, there was pilgrims here."
Sure. Yeah. So that's something very real that you did. Did you want to add something? I sensed there was some addition to that somebody was going to make from this side.
It's also the power of faith, you know. It's very strong and very powerful. When you, in the old days, in the golden age, when people really believed that they could move mountains, I mean, they went to war, so they had to prepare themselves. The faith was very important to them, and they believed if they went into a tomb like that and went through the tomb with the right frame of mind, they would be all right at the end of the battle. So it's very powerful.
Catherine, this environment was changing. You'd come from a city, and by the time you got onto the A2, you're now in the countryside. And in this day and age where, you know, it's not just about perhaps fighting for the rights of humans or social justice in that sense, there's a bigger battle as well that I sense you guys are aware of.
Yeah, I think most of what we walked was actually down the main A2 route, so it was trucks thundering past all the way, which made conversation interesting. But we did turn off it sometimes to have a bit of respite and put our tents up. Yeah, it's interesting, it comes out in that clip how the pilgrimage tradition, as you were saying, is so much bigger than our little band of people on that particular date. And for me, it was a reminder that although the things that I get bothered about and get worked up about seem very significant to me, you know, in the scale of things, there is so much a bigger picture. And part of that bigger picture is this business of what mark we leave and treading lightly on the earth or not, which of course is all bound up with the Occupy concerns about the threat of you know, what capitalism and what our current way of life in the West is doing to our planet and what we're robbing from future generations.
So the environment is a big issue. I mean, the preservation of our society.
And one of the lovely things about camping is that you get really stuck in there. You realise how dependent you are on the earth in many ways.
Well, what fascinates me about this, and the relevance for more traditional pilgrimages which are maintained, is that traditional pilgrimage can often be turned into a ritual. I mean, I know lots of our Muslim brethren, for instance, who might take an economy or a first-class flight from here over all those lands, plonk themselves in Mecca, and they land in Mecca, and actually then it's all about the ritual, and it's all about the actual what happens there, which is testing and trial, and it's very emotionally and spiritually exhilarating. I'm sure it's got a whole kind of profound effect in itself. But I sometimes think that you've missed the point if you've not gone through a sort of a journey that goes through different lands and different cultures, which is perhaps what they did in years gone by when there weren't aeroplanes that landed you and desensitized you to the cultural kind of awakening that you would otherwise have had if you'd gone through the different lands to get to.
Well, of course, you know, if you think about it, Sussex has got quite a few different cultures, micro-cultures, perhaps you'd want to call them, as you go through. I mean, Dartford is really, you know, it's Kent actually, sorry, but you know, you walk through Kent and there's Dartford, and it's a deprived area. You know, there's a lot of people with no jobs. It's a poor area, and people feel ground down in that place. And then you move on to Rochester, and Rochester's very, very, very much the opposite. So I think you know, you do get an experience of moving through different places and picking up different a feel of a different place as you go. You know, but one thing that did maintain itself throughout the pilgrimage was the support we got from the communities that we intersected with. You know, people were very kind and very supportive, and that's part of a tradition as well. You know, that tradition of welcoming and supporting and feeding, and you know, you can't have pilgrimage without that. And so I think that's what struck me most powerfully, really, about the whole experience was to let yourself go and just trust that something's going to be there.
And in a way, that was reflective of what Catherine was saying before we came on air about how a lot of the silent, unsung heroes and the things that are being done, which are good, based on an ethical kind of moral, you know, virtue orientation within the church and within many other faith-inspired or non-faith-inspired groups. There is a lot of good being done, but often it doesn't get talked about.
I think one of the great things that the Occupy movement did was to draw attention to issues that certain factions didn't want talked about and still don't. And to get that conversation going is a very, very valuable thing. And I think that was achieved.
We're running towards the end of the programme now, but we're going to look at the clip Wounded Bird now.
This will be hard. Never meant to be easy. That's what pilgrimage is about. It's about repenting an old way of life, engaging in a journey to change your way of life, and then going into a new one. It's getting almost like a death experience.
Wounded finch. It's a little wet. Just put it in a shady spot.
I saw her die.
Put her in a shady spot.
I saw her die.
You might be wrong. Put her down and just hope she'll be okay.
In a shady spot.
This clip was a very poignant one, and this bird is very symbolic in many ways of life and death, the fragility of it. How did you react to this, Alan?
Well, the clip, the part of the clip where I'm talking, I think I'd relate to what you were saying a minute ago about the difference between making the journey by foot or flying over and engaging with the ritual. So I'm a firm believer that nothing in this world that is worth having you can gain without some suffering. There's always some sort of sacrifice to be made before you learn anything. And I think that is integral to pilgrimage, of what we all went through, because there were testing times for all of us in there. And without that, I don't think we would have gained so much from it personally, because there was a lot of development all around that went on. And I think that the bird moment symbolised sort of unreversible change that you get when you engage on these life-changing moments.
Well, fantastic. I mean, it was a powerful moment, and I'm just going to show the final clip, which is entitled, I think this one's called Multi-Faith Service, and this is almost in a way the culmination of the journey, and it seems very much symbolic of like a coming together of all sorts of thoughts, minds, ideas, spirituality, practicality, activism. And we're just going to watch that clip now.
Good luck. What happened to that comb I gave you?
It's in my bag.
Excellent. It's been great that you joined us, by the way.
Thank you.
Really great. You were the one who joined us last at Faversham.
Yeah.
But you were definitely part of the tribe. And you keep in touch.
Cyril's my new family.
Good. And you need best wishes, and you know, you need to find that all those things you want to do for the good. Speak truth to people. Good vibes.
See.
Pilgrims. Please, if I'm here. Come on, pilgrims.
And as you go from here on your journeys, may the road rise to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. May the rains fall softly upon your fields. And until we all meet again, may God hold each one of you in the hollow of his hand.
So you've now bonded. It seems like there's a huge spirit, and people have been coming and going, and new people have been joining your journey, and some perhaps have been leaving. But those who've stuck it out pretty much throughout have bonded. What was the change that you experienced?
It's the circle of life. You know, there's one for all and all for one. And that's what pilgrimage is to me. So it's wonderful. You can actually feel the spirit. Yeah, and we bond. It's the love. You feel the love. You want to come out and then do something, change somebody else's life, including your own, obviously.
And Catherine, how were you feeling at this time? The journey is more or less over now, but how had you transformed in any way, do you feel?
I think for me it's been part of a very big transition that's gone over some years in my life. and is still, that I'm still not, haven't arrived at the destination of. I think that's what life is. It's a series of leavings and goings and arrivings and leavings again, and you know, you leave the dead bird by the side of the road and you move on. Yes, I mean, it changed me, undoubtedly. I hope that life goes on to change me, because I think that all of life is a journey, cliched though that may sound. I really think that's true for those of us that are trying to find a better world for everybody, for our kids and for the future, and yeah.
Excellent. So Alan, at this stage, you've gone through that journey. Was it what you'd expected?
No, not at all. It was profoundly personal and more of a forging of a bond of friendship. Originally conceived as some sort of political demonstration, but really resulting in a personal transformation, where I made friends for life who are now part of this vision. I'm not sure, we haven't defined it properly yet, but I've now got a dozen or so allies in this crazy cause, and that's better than any kind of message we could put out. It's having a group.
So it's a sense of brotherhood, sisterhood, family almost, and it's interesting how the biggest gain seems to be on a very personal level, whereas it starts out as a sort of a movement for change. So actually, whether or not you get the change on the macro scale, the reality is that there seems to be a very profound change on the micro level, which perhaps is where it all begins anyway. And John, in conclusion, you talked about a moment of indignation, a moment of decision, then the nature of the pilgrimage taking over, and that's very much what it seems to have happened. Can you go back to that indignation issue and just guide me through how you feel the process actually evolved and what it achieved?
Well, I mean, it was a very stressful experience. Filmmaking is hard work, you know, and pilgrimage has also got its own stress. So, I mean, and yet, in spite of that, I felt empowered by it, because I had made the decision before I left that, you know, I had reached a point in my life where I felt I had to make a statement of some sort, and I couldn't go on, you know, sitting on my hands and waiting for somebody else to sort out the problems of the world. But I had to feel engaged in the process of change myself, and feel engaged in at least attempting to make a change where one is so obvious. I mean, we are in a dire situation here in terms of the future of the planet. If we don't make some changes to the rampant consumption that continues apace, there won't be anything left for future generations, and growth is no longer the answer. It's very plain to anyone with half a brain that must be the case, and yet our political leaders seem to have, on either side of the spectrum, seem to have no answer and no suggestion for how to actually engineer a realistic future for mankind. So I do think it's important for people to stand up and make statements about what they really believe to be important. I think we live in a culture these days where opposition has now started to become a sort of dirty word, and I think that's wrong, personally. I feel that opposition is a vital duty as a citizen.
Well, it's been absolutely fascinating to have you all here, and thank you so much for sharing those very, very personal moments at times, and also the macro issues that you've opened up. I think that I could probably do a follow-up program on each one of those issues that's been raised in there, and hopefully maybe we'll be able to invite you back at other junctures and unpick some of those very, very powerful themes that have emerged from here. I'm just going to conclude this on two things that are very personal to me. One is a book I came across many years ago called Conference of the Birds, written by a 12th century mystic and Irfani traveller called Fariduddin Attar Friesen Utter writes Conference of the Birds as a clarification of the journey of the self. Birds, thousands of birds set off on a journey to find what's known as the Simurgh. The Simurgh is the great celestial origin of all things and the greatest bird of all. But in the search, it ultimately culminates with the birds, only a handful of the birds finally making it to where the Simurgh is meant to exist. And when they arrive, the ones who do make it, see simply a reflection of themselves, and that they find their own selves. So they're symbolic, it's an allegorical, kind of metaphorical kind of thing of all truth lies within you, and God is closer to you than your own jugular vein, which is a Quranic verse. And I combine that with pilgrimage from particularly the Shia Muslim tradition, which is also very strong within the wider Muslim fraternity. What you've talked about really relates to the journey of Hussein ibn Ali, the grandson of the Prophet, who at a certain juncture decides that society has become so spiritually bereft. They've got it so wrong in terms of what his grandfather had tried to establish in a very barbaric part of the land. But in fact, what happened was that an imperial rule had emerged, which had more or less tried to relegate the spiritual and relegate those things which were just, honest, ethical, moral goodness was no longer there. And he sacrifices and dies, and has the whole family is martyred as a result. And that sort of kind of is again a very powerful emotional story or piece of history, which shows the power of journeys, the power of protest. But now that very protest is commemorated by millions and millions of people, and the power of that particular journey or that protest has turned into a pilgrimage in itself. So it's funny how protest and social justice and spirituality and then pilgrimage has some sort of cyclical connection. It can go both ways. But thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Look forward to perhaps picking on you one by one and inviting you back and sharing on that journey perhaps again in more detail. Thank you very much for joining us. Until the next edition of Faith to Faith.